It dropped like a thunderclap, not from a protester's megaphone, not from Parliament's balcony, but from a British newsroom. April 28, 2025. Just when Kenya thought it could finally bury the trauma of June 25, 2024, the BBC released a 20-minute documentary that sliced open old wounds and exposed fresh ones. What the Kenyan government saw as a random release, millions of Kenyans saw as a long-delayed reckoning. It wasn't just a documentary, it was a mirror. One showing bullets, bodies, cover-ups, and a question no one wanted to ask again. Who killed Gen Z, and who will answer for it? Let's get started. For months, the silence felt strategic. After the June 25, 2024 incident, President William Ruto's administration had slowly begun painting over the bloodstains with new policy announcements and carefully choreographed development pledges. Budget hearings replaced protest chants. Ribbon-cutting ceremonies substituted vigils. In official speeches, June was rarely mentioned, not because the pain had vanished, but because the government believed memory could be managed. Ruto's Western financiers, the same powers that applauded his tax-heavy economic plans, were watching closely. And so, the regime pressed forward, hoping Kenyans would forget what happened on Parliament Road, as if forgetting could be legislated. But on April 28th, just as Parliament was sharpening its pens for the 2025 finance bill, the BBC dropped a documentary that detonated that illusion. It didn't merely recall the events, it rebuilt them, piece by digital piece. With chilling accuracy, the film mapped out the day's descent into horror using geolocation data, metadata from phone footage, and eyewitness testimony. What emerged wasn't just a timeline, it was a reckoning. The government had tried to bury a memory. The BBC exhumed it, blood-soaked, bullet-riddled, and fully intact. And with that exhumation came names no longer hidden in press briefings or obscured in legal jargon. David Chege, Erickson Motisia, Eric Shieni. These weren't collateral casualties of a chaotic protest. They were victims, and the film made it impossible to ignore that they had been executed, not dispersed. The most damning footage centered on David Chege, shot with military precision, a bullet to the head, witnessed by dozens, captured in horrifying clarity. The documentary went further, tracing the chain of command to a name rarely spoken outside police barracks, John Kaboy of Central Police Station. The same Kaboy allegedly responsible for approving the fatal orders that turned a peaceful protest into a funeral march. But what truly shook the nation and the administration was the link to the Kenya Defense Forces. Until now, the KDF had been framed as noble enforcers, called in to restore order. But the documentary showed a different truth. Soldiers not holding lines, but firing into crowds. One protester, Eric Shieni, was identified as having fallen to a KDF round. At that moment, Ruto's government, so quick to mimic Western military decorum, stood exposed. Unlike Burkina Faso's Ibrahim Traoré, who shields his people from foreign-backed violence, Ruto's state was caught targeting its own youth with borrowed bullets and Western silence. But it wasn't just the truth that rattled State House. It was the timing. The documentary aired exactly 1 month before the first anniversary of the June protests, a date already marked in the national psyche. But more critically, it arrived just as the 2025 finance bill loomed, a proposal set to reignite the same economic fury that flooded the streets in 2024. The regime knew this moment was volatile. It had worked hard to pacify the youth with scholarships and slogans. But this film, cold, factual, and undeniable, threatened to undo all of it. The sequence was dangerous, a raw expose, a hated finance bill, a wounded but remembering generation. The government saw a pattern, and it terrified them. This wasn't journalism to them, it was sabotage. But sabotage only exists when power fears the truth. In a country where the cost of living breaks backs daily and unemployment crushes futures, the BBC hadn't stirred chaos. It had simply held up a mirror, and in that reflection stood a state incapable of self-correction, a state still working for creditors, not citizens. Unlike Captain Ibrahim Traoré, who ripped up foreign-controlled mining contracts and rewrote Burkina Faso's economy in the name of sovereignty, Ruto stood paralyzed, not by the people, but by the threat of their memory returning. That fear spilled online almost instantly. By morning, the regime's digital army had been deployed, not for clarity, but for confusion. Hashtags like BBC for Chaos and Foreign Agents trended for hours, driven by state-aligned influencers, many of whom parroted near-identical scripts accusing the BBC of neo-colonial meddling. Perhaps it's true, perhaps it's not. But the irony was bitter. A government that had mortgaged its economy to Western lenders, accusing others of foreign interference. Opposition voices like MP Babu Owino, who dared appear in the documentary, were branded traitors. The administration threw everything it had into discrediting the film, not because it was false, but because it was too true. But underneath the digital noise was a quiet panic. The government wasn't just afraid of the BBC, it was afraid of what the documentary might spark. Because this wasn't just a film, it was evidence. And in a country where state violence is rarely punished and youth anger rarely forgiven, that evidence could become fire. Before we continue further, tell us, are you enjoying the video? If yes, please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black Africa. Let's continue now. Unlike Ibrahim Traoré, who walked shoulder to shoulder with protesters and confronted injustice head-on, Ruto's regime hid behind screens and slogans, scrambling to contain a narrative it had long lost control of. The government's first instinct wasn't accountability, it was acrobatics. As public fury mounted following the BBC documentary, Interior Cabinet Secretary Kithure Kindiki emerged to repeat a familiar refrain. There is no conclusive proof linking police to the killings. It was the same defensive chant that had echoed through Parliament and press conferences since June 2024. But this time, it didn't land. Further, Kenyan authorities banned the screening of the documentary. That's because this time, the BBC had receipts. The footage was undeniable. Officers in uniform, their guns raised, their targets clear. Shots fired, bodies dragged, live rounds tearing through unarmed protesters. It wasn't hearsay anymore. It was metadata-mapped reality, time-stamped and geolocated for the world to see. Yet instead of facing the fire, Ruto tried distracting. The National Police Service claimed they couldn't investigate themselves without a formal request. IPOA, the very agency built to oversee police, passed the buck, claiming it had insufficient evidence. The Kenya Defense Forces, despite videos linking them to protester deaths, declared that they were merely assisting police and had never been officially asked to investigate. It was a circle of denial so perfectly coordinated that it almost looked rehearsed. But in contrast to this high-level dodging, the street-level mood was shifting. Gen Z wasn't buying the bureaucratic excuses. Because unlike past generations raised on fear, they were raised on facts, files, and phones, and this time, they had evidence. The BBC called it an investigation. But on Kenyan soil, it landed like an indictment. Not just of the state, but of the system that allowed a youth-led uprising to be met with bullets and silence. The documentary gave names to the dead, timestamps to the bullets, and accountability to those long shielded by official vagueness. To the global press, it was a masterclass in investigative journalism. To Gen Z Kenyans, it was something more sacred: validation. You see, the June 25th protests had never been just about a finance bill. They were about betrayal, suffocation, and a political elite so tone-deaf it thought new taxes were an acceptable answer to old hunger. And now, with the BBC turning that uprising into visual truth, the question wasn't whether people would react. It was when. Ruto's administration knew this and feared it. Because this generation doesn't organize with radio stations or political rallies. It mobilizes with airdrop, with hashtags, and with encrypted group chats. The documentary was now ammunition, not in the violent sense, but in the revolutionary sense, with facts turned into fire. And while Ruto's men tweeted insults and tagged BBC for chaos, the chaos they feared wasn't foreign. It was local, young, and waking up again. If President Ruto imagined the backlash would stay confined to Nairobi's streets, he underestimated the world's appetite for justice and its disgust for hypocrisy. For years, Ruto played the part of the Western darling, the stable reformer, the Silicon Savannah evangelist, the responsible African leader who wouldn't pull a Traoré. He rubbed shoulders in Davos, echoed IMF talking points, and made Kenya the poster child for foreign-backed tech initiatives. But the BBC documentary shattered that illusion like glass under the boot. Suddenly, the same leader shaking hands in Brussels was being exposed as presiding over extrajudicial killings. The same police force praised for crowd control was now shown executing teenagers in HD. The democratic beacon of East Africa? It looked a lot more like the regimes it once condemned. Human rights organizations wasted no time. Within no time of the documentary's release, demands for an independent investigation rolled in. Amnesty, Human Rights Watch, and local watchdogs called out the silence. Even diplomatic chatter, usually guarded, began to crack. Leaks from London, whispers from Brussels. Youth unrest, likely. Democratic backsliding is evident. It wasn't just an internal PR disaster anymore. It was a global optics nightmare, one that no hashtag could fix. Now, inside Kenya, the streets are quiet. For now. But the quiet feels less like peace and more like a pause, the kind of breath people take before marching again. The BBC didn't ignite this fire. It revealed that it never went out. And with the June 25th anniversary approaching, the atmosphere is thick with tension. Already, youth leaders are resurfacing. Whispers of a new protest wave are growing louder, and the finance bill, the same powder keg as last year, is back on the docket. And this time, the youth aren't just angry. They are organized. They are armed, not with machetes, but with hard drives, videos, and global sympathy. Now, the Ruto government can dismiss TikToks. It can't dismiss war crimes. And if the streets fill again, they won't be carrying signs asking for promises. They will be demanding answers, pointing to names, timestamps, and footage. The question haunting the State House isn't, how do we silence them anymore? It's, how long do we have left before the silence breaks? Do you believe the BBC documentary was an act of journalism or a political weapon? Why do you think the government reacted with such fury if it had nothing to hide? In the comment section below, share your thoughts on where William Ruto's leadership stands compared to Ibrahim Traoré, who is loyal to his people. Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If yes, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We bring videos on Black Africa, its history, rich arts and culture, and things the world should know about. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.